Hello, this is T Chapman 500 and a YouTuber that I'm subscribed to, who has a much bigger channel than I do, decided to ask me if I would be willing to build a racetrack designed by an artificial intelligence bot. So I took him up on the challenge. And the first thing I thought of was, this better not be a super speedway. Now, I already read the first point and probably part of the second point, so that's probably going to spoil my reactions, but I figure I'll read this thing. So, Justin writes, design a perfect NASCAR oval racetrack, starting with how long it is, what shape it is, what the banking in the corners are, and how long are the corners. So the chatbot responds with, designing a perfect NASCAR oval racetrack requires careful consideration of various factors such as length, shape, banking, and corner length. Here is a proposal for a perfect NASCAR oval racetrack. Length. The track should be approximately 2.5 miles long. And the first thing I thought of when I read that is, this is going to be a super speedway. This is the same length as the famous Daytona International Speedway, which is widely considered to be the most prestigious NASCAR oval racetrack. I'm gonna stop right there. Can't help but notice that this chatbot seems to be conflating prestige with best. Yes, Daytona is prestigious, but is it the perfect track? I don't know. And I'm probably gonna get a lot of comments saying something along the lines of, how dare you? Shape. The shape of the track should be oval with 2 long straightaways and 2 tight turns. How tight? Because I can make them tight. Trust me. The turns should be symmetrical with the same radius and banking on both ends of the racetrack. Well, that eliminates some options. This will ensure that drivers have an equal chance to excel on both ends of the track. Okay. Banking. The banking of the turn should be between 24 and 28 degrees. This degree of banking will allow drivers to maintain high speeds through the turns while still providing enough grip to prevent cars from sliding up the track. There is this thing called brakes meant to slow cars down so that they can take the turns without sliding up the track. Otherwise, how do drivers drive Martinsville? They go from 60 miles an hour to 120 in about 800 feet, and then go from 120 down to 60. Anyways, additionally, it will create multiple racing lines, allowing for exciting side-by-side racing. I kind of question that, considering you're asking me to make a tight racetrack. Corner length. The corners should be approximately 800 to 900 feet long. This will allow drivers to maintain high speeds through the turns while still providing enough time to make decisions and react to any changes on the track. When you're driving on the track at speed, you really can't make any decisions while in the turns.
The yellow flag is out. Let's go. Race back to the line.
If you try and make your decision too abruptly, you're gonna spin out and make the situation worse. Overall, this proposed track design would provide an ideal balance of speed, grip, and excitement for both drivers and fans. Well, it might be interesting to watch, definitely gonna be interesting to build, and will probably be pretty interesting to race, since the track right now doesn't exist, and nobody's raced on it. Yeah, nobody's raced on it because it doesn't exist. Justin writes, how wide should the track be? Chatbot writes, The width of the track is also an important consideration in designing a NASCAR oval track. Can't help but notice that the chatbot seems to be sort of reiterating. I don't know how to put this, but this sort of seems like a scripted response. A wider track provides more opportunities for drivers to pass each other, while a narrower track can increase the level of excitement and intensity as drivers jockey for position in close quarters. I definitely agree with that. Just look at Darlington. A recommended width for a NASCAR oval racetrack is between 50 and 60 feet. This width would provide ample room for multiple racing lines, while still allowing drivers to maintain high speeds through the turns. Additionally, it would allow for safer racing conditions. I'll go with safety.
The yellow flag is out. Outside.
As it would provide enough room for drivers to make split-second decisions and avoid collisions.
The yellow flag is out.
Unless, of course, you're pack racing. In that case, it'll take a split second for you to even recognize that there's trouble, and then it's too late, you are caught up. Okay, I guess I should fire up Sandbox then. So here we are in Sandbox, and this is a customized version of Sandbox, one that's a bit more accurate. Now, NASCAR likes to measure their tracks 15 feet from the inside of the outside wall. Now, originally this was going to be a live commentary, but I decided that a time-lapse with a post-commentary would be a lot better. What you're looking at here is running at 4 times normal speed, and it should give you an idea of the exact process that I went through to make the segment. This time-lapse, by the way, is about 7 minutes in length. This modified version of Sandbox gives me 4 decimal points of precision, which works out to about 10 times the level of precision that iRacing has to work with. Needless to say, no one's gonna notice if something is 1/10 of a millimeter off from where it should be. And I'm also thinking of modifying Sandbox again to give me just 3 decimal points of precision, because I really don't need 4, and 4 is basically too much, because later on, as we get further from the origin, we're gonna notice some floating point rounding errors as we really zoom in. The green lines that you see are called F sections. You need 2 of those to make a drivable surface, and the number of drivable surfaces are the number of F sections minus 1. By the way, not all of these F sections are going to be accessible. Some of them are going to be blocked by walls. Walls are the blue lines, or W sections, and you don't need 2 or more of those to make a wall. You just need 1 per wall, and some of the walls, like the catch fence here, can be curved. And what you're gonna see is in a few seconds I'm gonna bring up the camera view, and I'm gonna be tweaking the curve from the camera view rather than the overhead view, because it's a lot easier to judge the curvature of the fence from the camera view to make sure it looks right. And here we go. As you can see, it doesn't really look right, and I believe this is where the 4x time acceleration stops. And by the way, bringing up the camera view or even the height view really causes instability within Sandbox. Now that I've brought up the camera view, I basically have to save the track, close the camera view, close Sandbox, and then reopen Sandbox. Also, since NASCAR measures the length of the track 15 feet to the left of the outside wall, I'm actually putting the right edge of the racing surface 15 feet to the right of that purple line, which is the center line of the racetrack. Or, it would be the center line technically, only if it was in the center of the racetrack. Now, I originally thought of making it so that the center line would have been measured 15 feet to the left of the safer barrier, but since most tracks have the safer barrier added on, I decided to do the same thing. So you're gonna lose 3 feet with the safer barrier. Now, Sandbox doesn't give a nice background for the text that you see on the screen, so whenever I need to modify something that has a white background or other background that's similar to the color of the text, I actually have to turn off the rendering of the track. And that's something you're gonna see quite frequently during this time lapse. Now, because the chatbot said to build the track similar to Daytona, I decided to put a dashed line about 20 feet from the outside concrete wall, though this is eventually going to be just in the turns and not on the straights, just like it is with Daytona. Now, you might have also noticed that I'm really only being picky about the position on one end of the segment, and that has to do with how I'm going to make the rest of the segments and make the widths consistent throughout the segments. What I'm going to do is make a copy of the segment by appending another segment, and then I'm just going to delete the original and then do a prepend, which is basically appending at the other end, to get the segment that I want and back in the original position. There are also many features that Sandbox is missing that would really come in handy, such as making sure that the sections are at the correct locations, or rather the same location at both ends of the segment, being able to copy the properties of the wall laterally across the track, and copying the wall texture coordinates correctly when I append or prepend a segment. Or for that matter, when I split a segment, because Sandbox has this really odd bug that doesn't quite copy the texture coordinates correctly. And it only happens on walls, and it only happens to texture coordinates that are stretched across the entire width or height of the wall. Basically, Sandbox forgets that the texture is supposed to be stretched across the entire width or height of the wall, so I have to correct that manually after I've made a copy of the segment. But you can see here how I'm making copies of the walls and fences. So what I'm going to do here is make sure that one end of the segment has all of the sections in the correct place. Then I'm going to copy the segment forward, delete the original segment, then copy a new segment backwards, which basically gives me the original segment, but with the sections at the correct locations at both ends. Now, you might have noticed that the background in the camera view is that of Daytona. I actually find that quite fitting, considering this track is being modeled after Daytona. And here comes the wall texture coordinate corrections. Now, this time lapse lasted about 7 to 7.5 minutes, and it's at 4 times normal speed, which means it took me about half an hour just to get this one small section of track finished. After I created those first 2 segments, I then decided to calculate the length of the straights and the radius of the turns, and I realized just how tight the turns were gonna be. It's at this point that I decided to have sort of a transition curve going into the corners. So I decided to go for a clothoid, but I didn't quite get it right. So here you can see me just zooming in and zooming in and zooming in until I can get an exact radius with an exact segment length. A clothoid, by the way, is a type of curve that tightens up or widens out linearly with distance. It's these types of curves that make road and rail travel smooth, and it's also used for roller coasters. Oh, and racetracks. And by the way, the process that you see me doing now, I basically had to do 12 times. Then do a similar process for the main body of the turns, but instead of using the radius, I use the angle. I think I'll just skip ahead a little bit. So here's the final layout of the track, minus the banking and pit road,
and I've already done the banking in turns 1 and 2 without recording. I decided to record before I do the banking in turns 3 and 4, and you can kind of see where I was intending to do a live commentary of this, before I instead went with a post commentary. So the process with the banking is the same as with making the segments. I just zoom in and zoom in and zoom in until I can get the level of precision that I want, and then just repeat the process for every segment that I need to bank. And at some point in this process, I realized that the turns are about 50 feet too short. So that's a total of 200 feet that the track is shorter than I intended it to be. I went through a very similar process to make the banking on the straights, except that instead of making a little flat area on the top of the racetrack just to the outside of the wall, I simply made the entire outfield flat. The flat section just to the outside of the wall in the turns is to sort of simulate some of the things I've seen in real life where there's this flat area and then a embankment on the other side. I believe the flat area on the outside of the wall is to help with maintenance crews reaching stuff like the lights and the catch fence. So once I completed the banking around the racetrack, I needed to put in pit road. But you might have noticed that ChatGPT did not give us the specifications for pit road. So I had Justin ask it where pit road should be located, and the results are quite interesting. Justin, approximately what distance should be between the exit of turn 4 and the beginning of pit road? And you just gotta love how ChatGPT gives us lectures on things that anybody with a quarter of a brain knows that we don't need lecturing on. This chatbot has absolutely no sense of critical thinking. Listen to this. The distance between the exit of turn 4 and the beginning of pit road on a NASCAR oval racetrack can vary depending on a number of factors, such as the size and layout of the track, the location of the start-finish line, and the desired number of pit stalls. Fact check. Mostly false. Pit road is generally put in the middle of the front stretch, and the start-finish line is generally put somewhere between the entrance of pit road and the exit of pit road, generally in the middle of pit road, which also happens to be the middle of the front stretch. Now I can put fact-checked ChatGPT on my resume. A common practice is to position the pit road entry just before the turn leading into the front straightaway. Fact check, false. For longer tracks, pit road is contained entirely on the front stretch. For shorter tracks, like Martinsville, pit road starts in turn 3 and ends in turn 2 because the straights aren't long enough to contain pit road. For slightly longer tracks like Richmond, pit road starts towards the end of turn 4 and ends towards the beginning of turn 1. This allows drivers to slow down and enter pit road safely without disrupting the flow of traffic on the track. The distance between the exit of turn 4... Wait a minute, now it's contradicting itself. The distance between the exit of turn 4 and the beginning of pit road would depend on the specific track design, but it should be long enough to allow drivers to exit turn 4 safely and to achieve a comfortable speed before entering pit road. That comfortable speed, by the way, is when you hit the pit road speed limit right at the point that the pit road speed limit starts becoming enforced. You're basically slowing down to pit road speed, and if you hit pit road speed at the point where it starts being enforced, then you did a perfect pit entry, assuming maximum optimum braking. For a perfect NASCAR oval racetrack, the distance between the exit of turn 4 and the beginning of pit road should be determined by experienced track designers, like myself, and engineers, who can use advanced simulation tools to optimize the location based on various factors such as track geometry, pit road length, and pit stall capacity. Typically, the distance between the exit of turn 4 and the beginning of pit road would be several hundred feet, but the exact distance would depend on the specific needs and conditions of the track. So I just put it 500 feet from the beginning of the first straight segment of the front stretch. For this track, I made pit road by first creating a segment split 500 feet from the start of the first straight segment of the front stretch. Then I calculated the length of pit road based on 30-foot long pit boxes. Later, I decided to make the pit boxes 20 feet wide. This should give plenty of room between the left side of the car and the wall, and the right side of the car and the edge of the pit box. Once I had calculated the length of pit road, I created another segment split. Note that when you're splitting a segment, the new length of the first segment is accurate, while the length of the segment that's after it is inaccurate. Very inaccurate. For this track, making pit road was fairly easy since I only needed to make pit road for a single segment without copying the data over to another segment. Usually, I have to split pit road between two segments and make sure that the two segments are identical at that section of the track. Here, I'm making sure that all of the materials are correct, so if you see red on the walls, that means no collision detection, which there isn't any red on the walls, so we have collision detection on all of them. To make the features of pit road, I add a few more F sections and make sure that the F sections on pit road are actually marked as being pit road. I'm also making sure that the apron around pit road is marked as apron near pit, which you can see it is. Decals are a little bit tougher than track geometry because Sandbox does not have any way to conveniently size decals by clicking and dragging. So I'm calculating the size of the decal by using a calculator and then doing a copy-paste into the size field. Now to save on time, I'm actually skipping a lot of the process, but this should give you a good idea as to what's going on. Here, I'm basically placing the bare minimum number of 3DOs to make the track fully functional, or what I believe is the bare minimum to make the track fully functional. Did you know that some 3DOs just won't render when you first load them into Sandbox? And by the way, these single instance 3DOs were relatively easy compared to placing all of the caution lights around the racetrack. I'll show you the process of making one caution light, then we're going to skip to making the AI lines. It's basically just right-click where you want the X and Y position of the light to be, then manually tweak the height and angle of the lights. No copy-paste, no segment relative placement. Now in order to make good AI lines, I have to be somewhat familiar with the track. So here I am going around the track without any AI lines in place, just trying to get a feel for the racetrack. Once I've taken a few minutes to practice with the racetrack, I'll get started with the racing line, which we're just gonna skip to. Now I've turned on the RefLap tool that's built into NR 2003, and I'm wanting to run the panic lines, so the min and max panic. But at first I try to stay off the wall, which as you can see I'm not doing a very good job of, so instead I just ride the wall all the way around. For the panic lines, it doesn't matter how slow or fast you run the track as long as you remember that the min panic goes on the right, the max panic goes on the left. Same with every min and max line. The min line goes on the right, the max line goes on the left. Oh dear. Oh dear. This is fine. Now it is very important that your panic lines do not go through pit road. In this case, the max panic line needs to come towards the outside so that it passes to the right of pit road. And you also need to make sure that you don't hit the wall in the process. And always make sure you double check the endpoints of where you started recording your AI lines to make sure there are no scenes like what you just saw there. Now for the pit 0 lines, you do need to make sure that they pass through pit road, and also after the merge point, gently merge them onto the racetrack so that the AI don't just dart up to the top line and wreck everybody. Also realize that the AI are stupid in this game. If you merge before the merge point, the AI will also merge before the merge point and get black flagged. You will need 3 lines per pit road. So this track has only 1 pit road, so that's 3 lines: pit 0, min pit 0, and max pit 0. You must make sure that all 3 pit lines merge onto pit road in a manner that the game will consider safe. Otherwise, the AI may get black flagged. The same thing goes with the pit exit. Make sure all 3 pit lines merge onto the track in such a way that would be considered a safe merge by the game. Also, the speed at which you record the pit lines does not matter. Just make sure that they're smooth enough that the AI can navigate them without becoming a moving chicane. It is recommended, though not required, for you to make a limp line so that the AI know where to go if they have severe damage and must quit the race. The limp line will be used by the AI to limp back to pit road and stay out of the way of the racing traffic. Again, speed for this line doesn't matter, just make sure that they can navigate it safely by making it a smooth line. Now for the race lines. There are 4 of these lines: min race, max race, race, and race line. The min and max race can be driven at basically any speed. Just make sure that they're smooth enough that the AI can drive them at full speed all the way around. Personally, I prefer driving them at a significant portion of full speed, like say 80% of full speed. That gives me enough control over the car that I won't crash, hopefully, while also ensuring that the lines will be smooth. Also, do your best to make the distance between the min and max race lines consistent throughout the track, because this will be how the AI drive the track side by side. If they're not consistent, then you could end up with the AI wrecking excessively. But again, it doesn't really matter how fast or slowly you drive these min and max lines. Just remember that the min line goes on the right and the max line goes on the left. If you do it the other way around, you're in for a little bit of trouble. Also, the min and max race lines will affect where the groove appears on the track, laterally anyways. For the race LP, I'm not entirely convinced that it matters how quickly you run this line, but it is generally recommended that you run it as fast as possible, or as reasonably close to as fast as possible, in order to get the best results. It is also recommended that you try to keep the lines between the min and max race lines. Though don't be too picky if the race LP bleeds through to the other side of either of the min or max lines. The race LP will be the line the AI take single file, so this should use up the entire width of the racing surface. It's basically the fast line. Note that the race lines will probably take you the longest to complete, as they will all take multiple attempts, whereas the other lines that we discussed earlier should be easy to do in one attempt, because it's not all that important for you to go fast with them. By the way, this is what you get if you skip the race line LP. So I haven't done it yet as far as this video is concerned, but you can see a bit of inconsistency. Green means full throttle, red means heavy on the brakes. Now, because the raceline file is a guide to the player on how to drive the track, this line must be nearly perfect. In other words, get on the throttle as soon as you can, get on the braking points at almost the perfect spot, turn in and track out at the perfect spot, make sure you hit the apex, and get the best line that you can, because that's going to tell the other players who drive your track what the best line is. It's this line that will take the longest to get right, and you might very well just have to settle for good enough depending on your skill level. This line will determine where the groove is drawn on the track and how dark it will be at various points along the track. The other lines simply determined where, going across the track, the groove would be drawn to. And here's what the completed race line will look like. Notice there's no groove on the straightaways, but there is a groove starting at the braking point, or the approximate braking point, and all the way around through the turns, and then the groove fades away as we accelerate off the turns. I didn't get a perfect raceline guide, but this should be good enough. The rest of what I recorded is just me racing and tweaking the AI, which didn't go very well. So because this video has already gone on long enough, I'm just going to end it off here and send you over to Justin's channel so that you can watch the race we did together. Hope you enjoyed. Don't forget to rate, comment, subscribe, and share, and I will see you in the next video. This is T Chapman 500 signing off.